Mexico is a country between the United States of America and Central America that's known for its Pacific and Gulf of Mexico beaches and its diverse landscape of mountains, deserts, and jungles. It is a country with 127 million people, most of whom speak Spanish, besides other 68 native language groups. The economy of Mexico is the 13th largest in the world in nominal terms and the 11th largest by purchasing power parity, according to the International Monetary Fund (IMF). In spite of this, enormous gaps remain between the urban and the rural population, the northern and southern states, and the rich and the poor. Cancun is a Mexican city of the Yucatan Peninsula bordering Caribbean Sea. It is also known for its beaches, which attract tourists from all walks of life. Mexico is the host of the 5th Global Platform for Disaster Risk Reduction and the first to be held outside Geneva, Switzerland, which happens to be the UN headquarters. The Mexico Global Platform took place at Moon Palace Hotel in Cancun, and the emphasis was from commitment to action. The conference was held in Mexico because of efforts demonstrated in dealing with disasters. In 2004, Indian Ocean tsunami killed a record 230,000 people. This prompted the United Nations to mobilize member states and begin to work on strategies that will reduce disaster losses globally. The first World Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction took place in 2005. After a 10-year period, Sendai City in Japan hosted the second one, where countries adopted global plans for reducing disaster losses. The Sendai Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction adopted what is now called Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, which also somehow succeeded the Hyogo Framework for Action on Disaster Risk Reduction. The global agreement clearly spells out global targets for reducing loss of life, numbers of people affected by disasters, economic losses, and damage to critical infrastructure. Besides the 2 World Conferences on Disaster Risk Reduction, which have taken place, the UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction organized annual meetings, also known as Global Platform for Disaster Risk Reduction, where member states review, assess, and energize efforts aimed at meeting the set global targets. Head of UN International Strategy for Disaster Risk Reduction, Robert Glasser, says much as the figures remain high, there has been tremendous progress in the last decade. With clear indication, the numbers are going down.
Absolutely. We're seeing a huge decrease in loss of life in many places as a result of early warning, evacuation, storm shelters, practice drill evacuations, and those sorts of things. So you can see really amazing progress. And with Sendai Framework, now we're talking about not just managing disasters, but managing the risk of disasters, including are we building hospitals in the right place? Are we building them in flood zones or not? Are we putting in place building codes and investing our money wisely so that the economic costs of disasters don't keep going up? Because that's a waste of money that could be used to educate children in healthcare, in economic development.
Most countries have had their infrastructure, such as schools, hospitals, roads, and other public utilities affected in time of disasters. This is the same reason heads of state and government, ministers, traveled to Mexico to concretize a global approach and action in minimizing the cost of disasters.
Sean todos ustedes bienvenidos a México, una nación pluriétnica y multicultural.
His Excellency Enrique Pena Nieto, President of Mexico, officially opened the conference with a call for world leaders to join hands in reducing loss of lives and economic losses. He said Mexico is moving fast in the area of risk management, adding the conference across the country an opportunity to learn on what other countries are doing while sharing their own experiences. A good example being how the country handled the Hurricane Patricio.
Privilegiada, pero que al mismo tiempo nos expone un gran número de riesgos, en especial.
Amina Muhammad is Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations and encouraged leaders to seriously consider pushing action on DRR frameworks and policies emanating from the Sendai Framework so that countries stay on course in implementing the Sustainable Development Goals.
The SDGs will not be achieved unless we address climate risk and disaster risk. In many countries, the likelihood of mega disasters has greatly diminished thanks to stronger institutions, robust legislation and policy frameworks, better preparedness, improving early warning systems, and a greater understanding of disaster risk, increased engagement with civil society, and much more accountability.
The global platform took place with keen reflection on high statistics reflecting high numbers of people being affected by disasters and huge economic losses. Just in 2016 alone, 8,000 people died, while 445 million others were affected by disasters linked to natural hazards worldwide, including floods, storms, earthquakes, and drought. On the economic front, direct economic losses from major disaster events were estimated to be around 138.8 billion United States dollars. This is why the meeting focus is on investing in prevention through coordinated efforts.
Simply stated, human and economic losses from disasters cannot continue at current levels if we are truly to progress on the Sustainable Development Goals. Annually, disasters are costing the global economy some $520 billion and push more than 26 million people into poverty. Economic losses from disasters can wipe out the entire gross domestic product of a low-income country overnight and force millions from their homes.
After the opening session, delegates went in different directions, searching for meetings which best meet their interest. The civil society, academia, and private sector were in the forefront, pushing the inclusive agenda. Malawi was represented by Secretary to the Vice President and Commissioner for Disasters, Clement Chintupiri, Director of Disaster Management Affairs, DODMA, James Chosiwa, Veronica Mhango, Principal Mitigation Officer at DODMA, and Alice Kwereza, who is the Head of Mapping Division in the Department of Survey. Chintupiri delivered Malawi's official statement. He reported that the 2015 floods sent 106 people to an early grave. 172 were reported missing and 230,000 households were displaced in 15 of the country's 28 districts, while the total number of those affected were estimated to be around 1.1 million. A post-disaster needs assessment which was undertaken estimated the damage and losses were $335 million or about 250 billion kwacha. Chintupiri also told the World Gathering that in order for the country to fully recover, it requires about $494 million or about 370 billion Malawi kwacha. A case on Malawi's 2016 El Nino-induced drought, which affected 6.7 million people, was ably presented. Chintupiri says Malawi has developed relevant guiding documents which will help the country build back better and become more risk-informed.
In fact, we have a focus. We have put in place a national disaster action plan, which we're going to utilize. And this plan had to be in place because we needed to have some focus in terms of addressing disaster issues. And at the same time, the act to do with response to the disasters is also being amended to focus also on the emerging issues in disaster risk management, including the responsibility that the Sendai Framework has placed on states.
In one of the sessions headlined Understanding Risks, Malawi's head of mapping division in the Department of Survey, Alice Guedeza, made a presentation on the importance of satellite risk mapping as opposed to open data.
The situation in Malawi in terms of maps, we are using the open data. Why? Is because the mapping data is a bit expensive, because we have to buy it from our colleagues who have bought the satellites or the bought the aerial images, which Malawi cannot afford at the moment. And with the disasters that are taking place timely, it's not easy to get those data sets and be able to come up with a map. So Malawi, what the initiative we have done is we are using the open data like the Open Street Map. These maps are being made by volunteers outside there for the sake of supporting the victims during the analysis. So these maps are very important because the maps that are made, they are there to help government to plan and to monitor and analyze the risks that have taken place so that they can be able to help with the victims that have been affected.
It was in the same meeting where the head of monitoring and implementation of the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, Ricardo Mena, highlighted that the biggest challenge facing most countries is to understand specific risks hunting them. Mena had a special focus on the need for the private sector to be more risk-informed and invest wisely.
In Africa, and I would say in almost all the continents, the private sector is actually going ahead and doing millions of dollars in investments in new infrastructure, in new supply chain infrastructure, in creating warehouses and stores and hotels and what have you. So if that investment is not done based on a proper risk assessment, a sound risk assessment, then it may be that those infrastructures are going to be actually very highly potentially damaged by natural hazards when they happen. And that's why it's so important that the private sector does also its part.
The UN Women and Red Crescent movement have partnered in ensuring that the implementation of the Sendai Framework is gender sensitive. They emphasize on the need to put in place laws and policies that protect women in disasters and emergencies in general.
The objective of this partnership is to ensure that the implementation of the Sendai Framework will be gender responsive, that we will support as many member states as possible to develop gender responsive policies, plans and programs for disaster risk management.
Protection and gender-based violence in emergency and the response to that should be an integral part of life-saving package, because if we don't do that and we consider to see it as an afterthought, it may be too late, for too many, and that will be defeating, all the purpose, of this partnership.
Vice President of the Republic of Zambia, Inongewina, expressed Zambia's commitment in implementing the Sendai Framework. She, however, expressed need to put some elements into perspective for the implementation to go on smoothly.
We realize that the district does not meet the requirements of the people on the ground. So it means that the volunteer groups at the grassroots need to be capacitated to participate in the disaster risk reduction programs. And in doing that, you need to promote the participation of women in these programs, because their participation is crucial to the success of the DRR programs at the grassroots level.
While people were crisscrossing from one room to another, many took time to appreciate events taking place at the Ignite stage, Speed Networking Zone, and Marketplace. Reducing disaster risks goes together with innovation, and this is why many took interest in this robot, which enabled disabled people who could not participate at the conference to connect to this gadget and participate in meetings of their choice and interact with people just like any other person.
Yes, I'm logged on to an application. Feedback. Too close. Okay, this is a telepresence robot, which means someone can be anywhere in the world and guide the robot. They can drive themselves. They're fully autonomous. So in this program for the disabled, we have hubs in 5 locations around the world, in Fiji, Bangladesh, Washington, Brussels, and Philippines. And delegates have logged on from all of these locations and attended the conference just like normal delegates. They met people, they go to sessions, some have even been speakers at different sessions, and they acted like normal people and met lots of new friends. It's important because this is a precedent for inclusion of the disabled in conferences like this. It's extremely important in our domain of disaster risk reduction to be inclusive of disabled people in emergencies. They don't often get included in policy making. They don't ever get included in conferences, and many of them can't travel. So this is very important for us to have them here and show their presence.
Can we go somewhere? People like to see. Can you take me somewhere? Maybe let's have tea. Do you mind?
Yeah, how about a cup of tea?
Let's go. So let me go with him. I'll be back shortly. This is my best friend at this conference. He managed to escort me just to grab a cup of tea, which is quite interesting. Innovation in our times.
I've just experienced now technology real time. So when we spoke to some of the challenges people felt were at the forefront, inclusion. And in this particular case, seeing technology bring in those people with disabilities, not just for a scan of the room, but participation and hearing what they thought about some of the sessions that they attended using technology and the robots. That, of course, is the frontier issues that young people and generations coming will interface with as we try to get the 2030 agenda.
Among many other exciting side events was the UN and Japan's Nippon Foundation sponsored Sasakawa Awards presentation. The Sasakawa Awards, which takes place after every 2 years, recognize efforts aimed at saving lives and reducing global disaster mortality.
Announce the nominees for the Certificate of Distinction and the Certificate of Merit. I'm going to ask again Mercy to join us.
Portugal got recognition through efforts by the municipality of Amadora, while Iran made it through an Organization for Development, Renovation and Equipping Schools, DRES. Brazil through the GIDES project run by Brazil Ministries of Cities, National Integration, Mining and Energy, and Science, Technology and Communications earned them a distinction certificate, while Fiji impressed with efforts under the Habitat for Humanity and won a certificate of merit. The global negotiations were happening when U.S. government strongly expressed reservations on continued financing of the UN and climate change initiatives. Now, the Trump administration officially pulled out of the Paris Agreement, which many described as unfortunate. The UN admits U.S. has been a leading financer and will vigorously continue to engage concerned parties to see opportunities in such international accords.
It is time to exit the Paris Accord. And time to pursue a new deal that protects the environment, our companies, our citizens, and our country.
So for us, the train has left the station. What is required is that we need more ambition, we need to keep everybody on the train, and there are always, in changes in administration, a reflection of what previous administrations have done so that they can build on it. And we hope that in this instance, that the countries that may have some concerns will continue to engage so that they stay within what is an ambitious and necessary roadmap, and that we can discuss the ambition of their investments to make that roadmap happen. The United States reducing its commitments to the UN. Of course, that is of alarm because they have led for such a long time and their contributions have been key to some of the success that we've had, and we want to keep it that way. The demand is even more these days than it has ever been. For every dollar that they spend, there is a face behind it, and yes, we need to be more efficient. Yes, we need to find better ways of doing things together so that we can go further. But reducing the commitments to the United Nations is not the answer.
The marketplace was rich with information and patronized by a majority of the 5,000 delegates who participated at the conference. Most of them described the conference as a success.
Japan is very much suffering from lots of disasters historically, and we think it is our role to contribute in this sector for the people of the world.
So are you happy with the conference and the outcomes?
Yeah, of course. It is very informative, and I got to know lots of people from all over the world in this sector, and it's very informative and useful for me.
Very helpful in understanding that we are more than 180 countries present here. We all have to face basically the same challenges, although we are on different levels, different steps. But it's to agree on a common understanding. That's really helpful, and it's really helpful to create networks, because that's what we will have to do the next 13 years.
All things must come to an end. It was time for the closing ceremony. The Prime Minister of Mexico, Enrique Pena Nieto, thanked all excellencies for the fruitful meeting and called on all political leaders to prioritize implementation of DRR issues, especially by committing finances in their national budgets. UN Deputy Secretary General Amina Mohammed reported that the Leaders Forum discussed a wide range of issues ranging from education, building back better, awareness, public and private sector partnerships, infrastructure upgrade, regional collaboration, housing, climate change and water scarcity.
We committed to a disaster risk assessment of existing critical infrastructure by 2019 and to make disaster risk assessments a prerequisite for future infrastructure and housing investments. To further resilience, we will invest in the collection of data and information on risk and losses, and we will look to strengthen international cooperation on managing risk disaster and reducing mortality, reducing the numbers of people affected by disaster, reducing economic losses, and reducing damage to critical infrastructure. Finally, we decided that we will take stock of progress at the next global platform for disaster risk reduction, which we believe should take place in Switzerland in 2019. Thank you.
Mexico is rich with culture, and during one of the networking dinner, patrons were treated to a unique buffet of various performances.